AITA for watching my wife's emancipation fail after she called our marriage slavery? Modern slavery, that's what she called our marriage. Not a partnership, not a commitment, not even a mistake. Modern slavery. The day my wife declared our marriage was slavery, I did the obvious thing. I offered her freedom. Hers and mine. It all started about 6 months ago when she discovered an online community that apparently opened her eyes to the real oppression of married women. Overnight, everything I did became proof of my tyrannical control over her life. Making her coffee in the morning? I was reinforcing archaic domestic expectations. Asking if she wanted to go out for dinner with me? I was monopolizing her time. Working overtime to pay our mortgage? I was trapping her in a system designed solely for my benefit. The first time she used those words, we were sitting on the couch watching TV after I'd spent my day off fixing our leaky faucet and mowing the lawn. She looked at me with the glint of newly acquired wisdom and declared, "You realize all this is nothing more than modern slavery, right? I cook, I clean, I manage your social schedule. And for what? So you can feel like the man of the house." I laughed. I actually laughed. The woman who hadn't touched a lawn mower in 3 years, who considered loading the dishwasher her greatest contribution to home maintenance, was lecturing me on domestic slavery. But she wasn't joking. Her face was dead serious. "I'm not your maid," she continued, already on a roll. "I'm not your secretary. I'm not here to make your life comfortable while mine shrinks smaller and smaller." Now, here's the thing about my wife. She'd always been dramatic, but this was different. This wasn't the usual complaint about me leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to buy milk. This was a complete reinterpretation of our relationship, filtered through some ideology she'd found in a corner of the internet. In the weeks that followed, every conversation eventually circled back to her emancipation theory. If I suggested visiting my parents on the weekend, I was imposing unpaid emotional labor on her. If I mentioned we were low on groceries, I was assigning her domestic chores. If I worked late and came home tired, I was expecting her to be my personal catering service. The breaking point came during a dinner party with our friends. We were hosting the group at our place, and I had spent the afternoon grilling while she had made a salad and arranged some store-bought appetizers. Nothing unusual, nothing we hadn't done dozens of times. But sitting at the table with 3 other couples, she decided to enlighten everyone on the true nature of matrimony. "Marriage is just modern slavery with better marketing," she announced out of the blue. The table fell dead silent. "Think about it," she continued. "Women are expected to provide domestic services, emotional support, and social coordination with no actual compensation or recognition. It's unpaid labor, disguised as love." A friend's husband nearly choked on his beer. The wives exchanged that cautious look women share when someone is about to make things very uncomfortable. And she wasn't done. Take today, for example. I spent hours planning this menu, shopping for ingredients, preparing the food, and tomorrow I'll spend the day cleaning it all up. What does he do? He stands next to a grill for 30 minutes and gets praised as a thoughtful husband. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, waiting for my reaction. This was the moment to defend myself or let her redefine our marriage in front of everyone. But instead of feeling defensive or embarrassed, something just clicked inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt in months. I set my fork down on the table, looked her straight in the eye, and smiled. Not a happy smile, but a smile that said I understood exactly what game we were playing. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Slavery is terrible. No one should have to live like that." She blinked, visibly surprised by my agreement. The table remained silent. Everyone sensed something important was happening, but no one knew quite what. "If that's how you see our marriage," I continued in a calm, steady voice, "then we absolutely have to do something about it. Because I would never want to keep anyone in bondage. That would make me a horrible person, wouldn't it?" A heavy silence settled before someone changed the subject to the weather, but the damage was done. She had drawn her line in the sand, and I had accepted the challenge. What she hadn't realized was that freedom works both ways. If she wanted to be emancipated from the terrible burden of being married to me, I was more than willing to help her achieve that liberation. When our guests left, I was cleaning up while she was tapping away on her phone. She seemed to sense a shift had occurred. "You're being weird," she said without looking up from her screen. "Just thinking about what you said today," I replied, putting plates in the dishwasher. "About slavery, freedom, and all that. You made some interesting points." She finally looked up at me, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, as if she realized she might have pushed too far. But it was too late for regrets. She had opened this door, and I was about to walk right through it. The next morning, I woke up with absolute clarity about what needed to happen. If my wife wanted freedom from the slavery of marriage, then that was exactly what she was going to get. The next few weeks were like watching someone dismantle their own life, piece by piece, while calling it progress. She embraced the liberation theory and went full throttle, never looking back. It started with the food. On Monday morning, I opened the fridge expecting to find my packed lunch, something she had done without complaint for 2 years. Instead, I found a note stuck to the milk. Free women don't pack lunches for their oppressors. Figure it out yourself. I burst out laughing. I stood there in the kitchen at 6:30 a.m., laughing until my sides hurt because she thought this was a punishment. She thought forcing me to buy my own sandwich would break me and have me begging to go back to the old routine. That evening, I came home to find her slumped on the couch with a glass of wine, still in her pajamas from the morning. The kitchen looked like a post-apocalyptic set. The sink was full of dishes, coffee grounds were spilled on the counter, and an empty pizza box sat on the table. "How was your day?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how she would justify the scene. "Liberating," she said without looking at me. "I spent the whole day doing exactly what I wanted to do instead of what society expects me to do." "That's wonderful. I can see that," I replied, surveying the chaos. "Extremely wonderful." The irony was lost on her. The following week, her liberation project expanded. She stopped doing laundry, hers or mine. She stopped grocery shopping, claiming that keeping the house stocked was domestic servitude. She even stopped doing basic cleaning, letting dishes pile up until we ran out of clean utensils. But the part that struck me the most was something else. She kept spending money as if nothing had changed. New clothes appeared in the closet. Expensive skincare products piled up in the bathroom. She ordered takeout for herself every day, never once considering where the money to fund all this was coming from. The real turning point came when she discovered a group called the Wives Awakening. Every Thursday, she would disappear for 3 hours to attend their meetings, returning home energized and full of revolutionary new ideas about relationships. "Today we talked about emotional labor," she announced, coming back from one of these sessions to find me reading in the living room. "Do you have any idea how much unpaid emotional labor women provide in relationships?" "Enlighten me," I replied without looking up from my book. "We manage the social calendar. We remember birthdays and anniversaries. We maintain relationships with family. We offer comfort and support when men are stressed. We're basically unpaid therapists and personal assistants." I closed the book and gave her my full attention. "That sounds exhausting. How do you think we should solve that?" She blinked, surprised. She had expected an argument, not a question. "Well, women need to stop providing these services for free. We need to set boundaries." "Makes perfect sense," I agreed. "You shouldn't do anything that feels like unpaid labor anymore." My agreement, where she expected resistance, threw her off, but she pushed on. "Exactly. That's why I've decided to stop managing our social obligations. If you want to see your family or friends, you'll have to organize it all yourself. I'm not your secretary anymore." "No problem," I said, reopening my book. "I'll tell my mom to call me directly from now on." That weekend, she decided to test her new boundaries. My sister called about a family barbecue. Instead of automatically accepting and planning for it like she always did, she simply handed me the phone. "Your family, your responsibility." On Sunday morning, I got ready for the barbecue. She seemed surprised to see me putting on my shoes. "Where are you going?" "Family barbecue. The one you decided not to organize." "But I thought we both wouldn't go since I'm not handling that part anymore." "And why would I miss it? I'm perfectly capable of organizing myself. I've been doing it for 32 years. The look on her face was priceless, as if she'd never considered that by removing herself from the equation might just continue to work without her. She stayed home that day, posting cryptic messages on social media about choosing herself and breaking expectations. Meanwhile, I had one of the most enjoyable family gatherings in months. Without her subtle complaints about having to manage everything, I actually relaxed and enjoyed everyone's company. My sister even remarked how much more at ease I seemed. When I got home, she was waiting for me with what looked like a prepared speech. "I've been thinking," she began. and I've realized I need to take my liberation more seriously. Half measures aren't enough. If I'm going to break free from the slavery of traditional marriage, I need to go all the way. And what does that mean? I asked, genuinely curious to see how far she would take this. I want to try a separation. Not a divorce, just a break. I need to find out who I am when I'm not defined as someone's wife. This was it, the logical conclusion of her liberation journey. She wanted the best of both worlds, to keep the financial security and social status of marriage while living the freedom of a single woman. I looked at her for a long time. The woman who had shared my bed for 4 years, who had promised to build a life with me, was now asking for permission to pretend our marriage didn't exist, while still reaping all its benefits. Interesting proposal, I said at last. Tell me more about how you see this working. She launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about how this concept was discussed at the Wives Awakening meetings, temporary separations where the couple still lives together but leads completely independent lives. No shared responsibilities, no joint activities, no expectation of partnership. It's like being roommates, she explained, but with the legal protections of marriage still in place. So, you want all the freedom of being single with all the security of being married. It's not about security, she retorted quickly. It's about discovering my authentic self. I nodded slowly, as if seriously considering the idea. You know what? I think you're right. You deserve to find out who you really are. In fact, I'm even going to help you get the exact freedom you're looking for. The relief on her face was offensive, as if she'd expected me to fight, to beg her not to give up on our partnership. Instead, I was agreeing to give her everything she wanted. What she didn't grasp was that freedom works both ways. And if she wanted to find out who she was without the slavery of marriage, she was about to get a master class. The conversation about our separation happened on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, I had a plan that would have made a strategist proud. She came downstairs around 10 a.m. Apparently, her new liberated routine didn't include early mornings, and found me at the kitchen table with a laptop, a notepad, and what looked like serious paperwork. "What's all this?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of the coffee I had made hours earlier. "Just working out the details of your freedom project," I replied without looking up. "If we're going to do this separation experiment, we need to establish some ground rules to avoid any confusion." She sat down across from me, suddenly looking less confident than the night before. "What kind of rules?" I turned the laptop screen toward her. "Well, since you want to live like roommates with the legal protection of marriage, I figured it's best to formalize our arrangement. Make it official." The document on the screen was titled Cohabitation Agreement, Framework for Independent Living. I'd spent 3 hours that morning drafting it, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. "Here's how we'll split everything," I continued. "Rent, utilities, groceries, internet, insurance, all 50-50. Since we're no longer operating as a couple, it doesn't make sense for me to continue covering the bulk of the expenses to maintain our standard of living." Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Split expenses?" she repeated. "You know, like how couples usually share resources. But since you desire independence, you'll want to cover your own costs. It's perfect, really. You'll have complete control over your money without having to answer to anyone." I slid a printed copy across the table to her. She read through it, her concern growing with each line. "According to this, I'd have to pay $1,200 a month just for my share of the household bills." "That's right. Plus your car, insurance, phone, personal groceries, entertainment, clothes, all the standard expenses of an adult." "Exactly. Great, isn't it? Total financial freedom." The color drained from her face as she did the math. Her part-time job at the boutique brought in about $1,500 a month after taxes. She had never once stopped to consider the cost of the lifestyle she was accustomed to. "But we're still married," she said weakly. "Legally, we're still a unit." "Exactly. Which is why you keep all those legal protections you mentioned. But on a day-to-day basis, you wanted to live as independent individuals, right? Independent individuals carry their own weight." She stared at the paper as if it might change if she looked at it long enough. "This seems excessive." "Really? Because last week you claimed that expecting you to contribute to running the house was slavery. And slavery is excessive. So here you are, completely free. No one expects anything from you, and you don't have to do anything for anyone." I pulled out another document. "I've also drafted a social independence clause. Since you no longer wish to manage our social calendar, we will have completely separate social lives. You can go out with whomever you want, whenever you want, without any consideration for my schedule, and I'll do the same. What does that mean exactly? It means if you want to go out with friends, you go. If I want to have people over, I will. We're no longer each other's plus one. We're just two independent people sharing a living space. The silence grew heavy. I could practically see her brain trying to process how the situation had spun so far out of her control, so quickly. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the final document. Since we'll be living independently, it makes sense to have separate spaces. I'll be keeping the master suite with the en-suite bathroom. You'll use the guest room and the hallway bathroom. Why do you get the master suite? Because I'm the one paying for it. The mortgage is in my name. Remember, you're essentially renting a space from me now. So you get tenant-appropriate accommodations. Her hands were trembling as she set her mug back on the table. This isn't what I meant when I asked for space. No? What did you mean? I meant emotional space. Time to think. Freedom from expectations. And that's precisely what you're getting. Total emotional independence, zero expectations. You're free to think whatever you want, pursue whatever passions you like, become whomever you want to be. Wasn't that exactly what you said you wanted? She looked at the papers again, then back at me. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in her eyes instead of that arrogant conviction. I need some time to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. But just so you know, I'm implementing the new arrangement starting Monday, whether we've talked it through or not. I've already moved my things into the guest room temporarily, so you can use the weekend to decide where you want to set up your independent living space. That last part was a lie, but it served its purpose. The idea that I was moving ahead with or without her input visibly shook her. You can't just decide that on your own. Actually, I can. You wanted independence, and I'm giving it to you. The only choice you have is whether you want to be independent here or somewhere else. I closed the laptop and gathered the papers. I'm heading to the gym. When you're ready to discuss the details, let me know. But like I said, the new arrangement starts Monday, whether we've had this conversation or not. As I walked to the door, I heard her call out. This isn't fair. I turned back and gave her the same calm smile I'd used at the dinner party. Fair? You spent weeks telling me our marriage was a prison and that you wanted to be set free. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. How is that not fair? She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it. What could she say? That she wanted freedom, but not the responsibility that came with it? That she wanted independence, but not the cost? That she wanted to be liberated from the marriage while retaining all the benefits of being married? I'll be back in a couple of hours, I said. We can talk more then if you want. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, the papers spread out before her, finally getting a glimpse of what real freedom actually meant. Not the fantasy version her liberation group sold her, but the real-world version where bills have to be paid, responsibilities exist, and being an independent adult comes at a price. The best part was, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't gotten angry. I hadn't tried to argue her out of anything. I had simply taken her own stated desires and showed her what they looked like when applied logically and completely. If she wanted to play games with our marriage, she was about to learn that I not only knew the rules, but I was the one writing them. Monday arrived like a day of reckoning. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., same as always. But instead of tiptoeing around so I wouldn't wake her, I went about my normal routine. The coffee grinder whirred, the shower ran, the news played at a normal volume. Why should I accommodate someone who was no longer my partner? She came downstairs around 8 a.m., looking like someone who hadn't slept well. Her weekend had clearly been a heavy one. She'd spent Saturday holed up in the guest room on the phone, likely with her liberation group, seeking validation that I was being unreasonable. On Sunday, she only emerged to order food and glare at me as I meal prepped for the week. So, you're really doing this? She asked, looking at the stack of bills I'd left on the counter, with her name on half of them. We're doing this. Correction, this was your idea, remember? I'm just making sure it actually works. I handed her an envelope. Your share of this month's expenses. Since we're already halfway through the month, I've prorated everything. $600 for your half of the mortgage and utilities, plus about $200 for what you've consumed in groceries so far. She opened the envelope like it was a bomb about to go off. $800? I can't pay $800. then perhaps you should pick up some extra shifts or find a room for rent that fits your budget. The suggestion hung in the air like a dare. She could walk out the door and prove she was serious about independence, or she could admit her liberation movement was a fantasy she couldn't afford. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're married. You can't make me pay rent in my own home. This isn't your home. It's my home that you live in. And as of this week, you're living here as an independent individual, which means you carry your own weight, just like any other independent adult." I showed her a screenshot on my phone. I even looked up what a furnished room goes for in our neighborhood. "You're getting a good deal at $600 a month." Her face cycled through about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds. Anger, disbelief, panic, calculation, and finally, something that almost looked like respect, as if she were seeing me clearly for the first time in months. "Where am I supposed to find $800? "The same place any adult finds the money to live. You work, you budget, you decide what you can and can't afford." I finished packing my lunch, something I'd gotten very good at in recent weeks, and grabbed my keys. "I'm heading to work. When I get back, I expect either the payment or to hear about your alternative housing arrangements. Your choice." The drive to work was like the first clear-headed morning I'd had in months. No walking on eggshells, no tiptoeing around subjects, no managing someone else's mood, no wondering what criticism would be waiting for me when I got home, no trying to guess how to avoid the next lecture on my oppressive behavior. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "Can we talk when you get home?" I replied, "Sure. Have my money ready and we can talk about whatever you want." The passive-aggressive 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before she finally typed, "This is insane." "What's insane?" I texted back, "is spending weeks telling your own husband that your marriage is slavery and then being surprised when he offers you freedom." No reply. When I got home that night, she was sitting at the kitchen table, a checkbook and a calculator in front of her. She looked like someone who had just discovered that rhetoric and reality are 2 very different things. "I wrote you a check," she said without looking up. "Great. What did you want to talk about?" She finally looked at me, and I could see she'd been crying. But these weren't the manipulative tears from before. These were the tears of someone who had spent the day crunching numbers and didn't like the answer. "I can't live like this. I can't afford it." "Then you have 2 options. Earn more money or spend less. Both are entirely within your control. Or we could go back to how it was before." I sat down across from her, the same position we were in when she demanded her freedom just days earlier. "Back to when you called our marriage slavery? When you refused to contribute to the household? When you spent weeks belittling everything I did for us? I was trying to find myself. And now you've found yourself. You've learned that independence has a cost, freedom comes with responsibility, and calling your husband a slave owner has consequences." She looked down at her checkbook again. "I didn't mean it like that." "Of course you did. You meant it exactly like that. You believed you could have all the benefits of being married with none of the obligations. You believed you could treat me like dirt and I would just take it because that's what good husbands do." Silence settled between us. Outside, you could hear kids playing in the neighbor's yard. Normal life was going on while we sat in the wreckage of our partnership. "What if I apologize?" she finally asked. "Apologize for what? For saying those things? For being unfair? And would you really mean it? Or would you just be saying it because you found out independence is more expensive than you thought?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. "Here's the situation," I said, standing up. "An apology might have meant something a month ago, but you've shown me who you really are when things get tough. You've shown me how quickly you'll burn down 4 years of marriage for a fantasy of liberation. Why would I ever want to go back to that?" I took her check and put it in my wallet. "Thanks for the rent. I'll see you later." As I walked away, I heard her whisper, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." She was right. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be a whole lot better than this. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, I watched my wife discover what real independence meant. And it was beautiful, in the most educational way possible. She had started picking up extra shifts at the boutique, working 6 days a week instead of her comfortable 3. The woman who used to complain about being tired after folding a load of laundry was now coming home exhausted after 8 hours on her feet, dealing with difficult customers and inventory. The Wives Awakening meetings were the first casualty of her new schedule. Liberation groups, after all, are a luxury one can only afford when someone else is paying the bills. When you're working evenings to make rent, Thursday empowerment sessions become Thursday night shifts. The house was cleaner than it had been in months, mostly because she was barely there to mess it up. I had settled into a routine that worked perfectly for one person. Meal prep on Sundays, laundry on Wednesday nights, bills all on autopay. The domestic harmony she had called oppressive turned out to be surprisingly easy when only one person had to maintain it. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Without the constant stream of criticism and resentment, I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten. I started going back to the gym. I reconnected with old friends. I even signed up for a weekend woodworking workshop I'd wanted to take for years. The change was so noticeable it became a topic of conversation. My sister said I looked happier. A coworker asked if I'd lost weight. Even the barista at the coffee shop commented that I seemed more relaxed. The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife's liberation had finally liberated me. But the real breakthrough came on a Saturday morning in the 4th week. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when she came downstairs, still in her pajamas despite it being almost noon. She looked terrible, exhausted, stressed, like someone carrying a weight she wasn't used to. "Can I ask you a question?" she said, pausing in the doorway. "Sure. How did you make it all look so easy?" I turned to face her. "Make what look easy?" "Everything. Working, paying the bills, taking care of the house, managing it all. You made it seem effortless." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. It wasn't effortless. It was just necessary. So I did it. But you never complained. You never seemed stressed about money or exhausted from work. I did complain. You just didn't hear it because you were too busy explaining how oppressed you were. She winced at that, but didn't argue. I had no idea how much everything cost because you never showed me. You just handled it. "The groceries alone are insane," she continued. "How do people afford to eat?" I almost laughed. People budget. They plan meals, shop the sales, cook instead of ordering takeout every night. You know, all that oppressive domestic labor you freed yourself from. She sagged against the doorframe, looking defeated. "I don't know how you did it all. I didn't do it all. We were supposed to do it together. Remember? That's how a partnership works. But you decided a partnership was slavery, so here we are." The silence stretched between us. I could see her processing something, gathering the courage to say what she really came downstairs to say. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "Which one?" "Because there have been a few. All of it. The liberation stuff. Calling our marriage slavery. Treating you like you were the problem instead of valuing what you brought to our relationship." I set my coffee mug down and gave her my full attention. "Go on. I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you. And I let those women convince me that you were the enemy, that our marriage was the problem, instead of just normal stuff that couples deal with and work through." "What kind of things?" She hesitated for a moment, then seemed to decide honesty was the only card left to play. "I hated my job. I felt stuck, bored, like my life wasn't going anywhere. But instead of dealing with that, it was easier to blame our relationship, to make you the reason I felt suffocated. Now we were getting somewhere real. And now?" I asked. "Now I realize that being independent and miserable is still miserable, just more expensive and lonely." I nodded slowly. "That's a start. But realizing you were wrong isn't the same as understanding why you were wrong, or what you're going to do differently from now on." "I know. I've been thinking about it a lot, between shifts, trying to budget for groceries, and wishing I had someone to talk to about my day." "Wishing you had someone to talk to? Or wishing you had someone to listen to your complaints?" The question hit her like a physical blow. I saw the moment she realized that for the last few months, our conversations had been essentially her venting her frustrations while I absorbed it all, receiving no support in return. "I want to fix this," she said quietly. "I want to fix us." "That's good to know. But wanting to fix it and being able to fix it are two different things." I finished my breakfast and placed my plate in the dishwasher. "You showed me who you become when life gets hard. You showed me how quickly you're willing to burn it all down when someone tells you your problems are my fault. Why should I ever believe that won't happen again the next time you're unhappy?" She had no answer, which was progress. A month ago, she would have lashed out. "What would it take?" she finally asked. "What? For you to believe I can be different? Better?" I considered the question seriously, not because I was planning on taking her back, but because she deserved an honest answer. It would take time. It would take you proving you can be independent without falling apart or blaming other people for your choices. It would take you showing that you value what I brought to our partnership instead of resenting it. And if you did all of that, then we could talk about whether there's anything left to rebuild. But that's a long way off, and it requires you to actually want to be married to me, not just running from the consequences of not being married. I walked to the door, but turned back before leaving. In the meantime, your rent is due next week. And I think the experience of earning it is good for your character development. Leaving her there in the kitchen, I realized something had definitively shifted. For the first time since this all began, she was asking the right questions, not making demands. She was examining her own behavior, not mine. Whether it would lead anywhere was still too soon to say. But at least now, she understood the true cost of the freedom she had so loudly demanded. 2 months. That's how long it took for the woman who called marriage modern slavery to realize she had been living in paradise and calling it a prison. The final breaking point came on a Thursday night in October. I came home from my woodworking class to find her crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, bank statements, and what looked like job applications. "Tough day?" I asked, curious but not exactly compassionate. She looked up, her eyes red. "I got laid off from the boutique. They're cutting back for the slow season. Last one hired, first one fired." She gestured helplessly at the scattered papers. "I don't know how I'm going to make rent next month." I got a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "That's too bad. What's your plan?" "I don't have a plan. I've applied to 12 places in the last week and only heard back from 2. Neither of them pays enough to cover my expenses here. Sounds like you may need to consider alternative housing options." The words hung in the air like a challenge. This was it, the moment she would either have to own her independence or admit her entire liberation experiment had been a costly mistake. "Is that what you want?" she asked in a small voice. "For me to leave. What I want is irrelevant. This is about what you can afford and the choices you're willing to make to maintain the lifestyle you chose." She stared at the bills for a long time. "I can't afford this lifestyle. I never could. I was living in a fantasy where someone else took care of the hard parts, and I just complained about how unfair it all was." "That's right. I was wrong. About all of it. About calling marriage slavery. About saying you were controlling. About thinking I deserved freedom without responsibility. I was completely, shamefully wrong." I set my water glass in the sink. Being wrong isn't a character flaw. Staying wrong after you know the truth, that is. I want to come back. Not to the old way, but to a real partnership, where I contribute instead of just consuming and complaining. And what would that look like in your mind? She had clearly thought about it. It would mean me finding a real job, not just something to pass the time. It would mean me taking on my share of responsibilities without being reminded. It would mean valuing what you do instead of taking it all for granted. And when life gets stressful again, when I get unhappy about something and look for someone to blame, it would mean I handle it like an adult instead of wrecking my marriage for the validation of strangers. I walked over to the table and sat down, just as we had done so many times in the last few months. But this time was different. She seemed different, humbled, more centered, like someone who had actually learned something important about herself. "I'm not the same person who walked out of here demanding liberation," she continued. "These last 2 months have been the hardest of my life, but also the most educational. I've learned that independence without competence is just expensive loneliness." "What else have you learned?" "That I had a good man who loved me and provided for me and supported my dreams, and I threw it away because a few bitter women convinced me he was the enemy." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I learned that a real partnership isn't slavery. It's the only thing that makes life manageable." I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation or self-pity. All I saw was exhaustion and sincere regret. "If I consider letting you back into our marriage, it won't be as my dependent. It will be as a full partner with equal responsibilities and equal accountability for the consequences. I know. No more liberation groups. No more outside voices telling you how oppressed you are. No more treating our partnership as a burden instead of a blessing. I know. And if you ever start calling our marriage slavery again, I will hand you divorce papers that same day. Not as a threat, but as a promise." She nodded, tears flowing freely. "I understand." I reached over, took the pile of bills, and added them to my own stack. "I'll cover this month while you find a job." But this is the last time I clean up a mess you made because you chose pride over partnership. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Prove you deserve a second chance. Show me you learned something that was actually worth learning. Over the next month, she did exactly that. She landed a full-time job at a doctor's office, earning nearly double what she made at the boutique. She took over the grocery shopping and meal planning without being asked. She organized her own social life and maintained her friendships without expecting me to manage her emotional needs. And most importantly, she stopped taking our partnership for granted. When I fixed something around the house, she said thank you. When I solved a financial problem, she acknowledged it. When we spent time together, she seemed genuinely grateful for my company, not resentful of my presence. The woman who came back to our marriage was fundamentally different from the one who had left. Not because I had changed her, but because reality had taught her a lesson no conversation ever could have. 6 months later, we were hosting friends for dinner again. As we were cleaning up, one of our friends remarked how happy we both seemed. "What's your secret?" she asked. My wife looked at me, then back at her. We learned the difference between a partnership and slavery. And more importantly, we learned that freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the ability to choose your responsibilities wisely. I smiled as I loaded the dishwasher. Sometimes you have to lose something to understand what it was worth. She nodded, carefully drying the glasses. And sometimes the best way to save a marriage is to let it end for long enough that you both remember why you wanted to be in it in the first place. Our friend looked confused, but we understood perfectly. My wife had gotten the exact liberation she had begged for. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.